At the dawn of the modern era, one empire stood unrivaled, the British Empire, a colossal force whose navy ruled the seas and whose influence spanned continents. Yet, from humble colonial beginnings, a new power emerged that would ultimately challenge and break that imperial hold, the United States of America. How did a collection of rebellious colonies evolve into the very nation that shattered the British Empire's aura of invincibility? Stay with us for an in-depth exploration of the wars, economic shifts, and global realignments that tipped the balance, forging a new world order led by the stars and stripes. Welcome to Shattering the Lion's Roar, How America Undermined the British Empire. Over the course of this documentary, we'll dive deep into the complexities of Anglo-American relations, from the sparks of revolution in the late 18th century, through the forging of American unity in the fires of war, to the rise of the United States as a world superpower, overshadowing the empire upon which the sun never set. You'll discover how the rebellious spirit of 13 colonies became the catalyst that cracked the foundations of British dominion, inspiring revolutions, reshaping global alliances, and setting the stage for modern geopolitics. Join us on a journey spanning centuries, encounter dramatic battles, fierce economic rivalries, and ideological clashes that all funneled into one epical shift, a moment in history where the lion's roar finally dimmed, replaced by a new brand of leadership from across the Atlantic. If you've ever wondered how a fledgling nation upset the greatest empire of its day, you're in the right place. Let's begin. In the mid-18th century, British North America functioned under a delicate balance of prosperity and simmering tensions. 13 colonies stretched along the Atlantic seaboard, their inhabitants loyal subjects of the crown, yet increasingly self-reliant. On the surface, these settlements thrived under British mercantile policy. Raw materials like tobacco, timber, and fur streamed back to Britain, while manufactured goods arrived in the colonies. Taxes and tariffs designed to enrich the motherland bound this transatlantic relationship. However, beneath the veneer of mutual benefit, resentment brewed. Colonists chafed under laws they had no role in creating, particularly as Parliament began to tighten fiscal controls. The Sugar Act, 1764, and Stamp Act, 1765, slapped taxes on everyday items, papers, cards, even legal documents, sparking outcry among lawyers, merchants, and common folk alike. Suddenly, the idea that taxation without representation was an injustice took hold. Ordinary people from Boston to Charleston boycotted British goods, proclaiming their right to be treated as full English citizens or not at all. Meanwhile, Enlightenment ideas of individual rights and governance fanned the flames of dissent. Thinkers like John Locke influenced colonial intellectuals who began to challenge the moral and legal basis of absolute monarchy. British attempts to quell defiance, like sending troops to quell riots in Boston, only inflamed local pride. Sam Adams, Patrick Henry, and other agitators emerged, forging a potent alliance of radicals and moderates who believed the time had come to assert independence. By the 1770s, the once cooperative colonies teetered on the edge of open rebellion. Town halls rang with talk of liberty, protest songs replaced tavern ballads, and committees of correspondence united disparate regions in their stance against Parliament. Britain might have dismissed this unrest as an isolated squabble until Lexington and Concord turned grievances into gunshots, igniting the flame that would lead to revolution and ultimately the first cracks in the mighty British Empire. By the spring of 1775, tensions erupted into outright conflict. British troops aiming to seize rebel arms encountered colonial militiamen at Lexington and Concord, and the shot heard round the world reverberated across the Atlantic. Almost overnight, the question of whether these 13 colonies could defy the world's most formidable military power became urgent reality. Skirmishes turned into full-scale engagements, culminating in the Battle of Bunker Hill, where colonists held off waves of redcoats before finally retreating. Despite these early clashes, the idea of complete independence was not universally embraced at first. Many colonial leaders still hoped the dispute could be resolved through petitions or negotiations. But King George III's refusal to compromise, coupled with Parliament's unwavering stance, pushed the Continental Congress to adopt a bolder position. Thomas Paine's pamphlet Common Sense further galvanized public opinion, arguing that independence was not just feasible, but morally imperative. By July 1776, the Declaration of Independence hammered home the point. The colonies would no longer submit to British rule. Names like George Washington, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson stepped into the limelight, forging a nascent government under the banner of liberty. In battlefield terms, the American Revolution pitted a guerrilla-savvy colonial army against professional British regiments. Yet it was not a purely military affair. Diplomatic entreaties to France and Spain transformed the conflict into a broader international struggle, as European rivals seized the opportunity to weaken Britain. The war's turning points, such as the Saratoga victory, proved that the Americans could match Britain when bolstered by foreign aid and popular resolve. At Yorktown, General Cornwallis's surrender effectively sealed the improbable triumph. For Britain, losing these colonies was far more than a superficial defeat. It undermined the empire's claim to moral and geopolitical supremacy, shaking the confidence of its global holdings. The rest of the world looked on, amazed that a band of colonial upstarts had challenged and humbled the greatest empire on earth. The newly formed United States did not immediately topple the entire British Empire, but its successful revolution cast a long shadow. Over the ensuing decades, the two nations jostled for influence on the North American continent, culminating in another military confrontation, the War of 1812. Rooted in maritime disputes and British impressment of American sailors, this war tested whether Britain could reassert dominance over the renegade republic. During this conflict, the British Empire still possessed the world's mightiest navy. However, it was stretched thin by the concurrent Napoleonic Wars in Europe. Britain's blockade of American ports stifled trade, yet U.S. frigates like the USS Constitution scored surprising victories, boosting American morale. On land, the British captured and burned Washington, D.C., including the White House, an alarming statement of imperial wrath. But American forces delivered key counterpunches, notably repelling a British assault on Baltimore, inspiring the Star-Spangled Banner. Crucially, the Battle of New Orleans in 1815, albeit fought after a peace treaty was signed, but not yet ratified, elevated Andrew Jackson to national hero status and proved that Americans could stand firm. Though the War of 1812 ended in a formal stalemate, it generated a sense of unity in the United States, dispelling any illusions that Britain could force a reabsorption or subjugation of its former colonies. This conflict also catalyzed economic changes. With trade routes disrupted, the U.S. developed its own manufacturing capabilities, less reliant on British imports. Elsewhere in the empire, news of American resilience trickled to British colonies around the globe. If a ragtag group of rebels could hold out against British might, perhaps others could too. Over time, the seeds planted by the American Revolution, reaffirmed by the War of 1812, emboldened independence movements worldwide. While Britain's empire still expanded in places like India and Africa, cracks had formed in its ideological veneer. No longer was British rule deemed an unassailable fact of global order. America's repeated defiance had shown that the lion could bleed. By the late 19th century, the United States had transformed into a burgeoning industrial titan, stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Railroads crisscrossed the continent, steel production soared, and new markets opened for American goods. Meanwhile, Britain retained its vast empire, spanning Africa, Asia, and beyond, yet faced growing challenges. Germany emerged as a continental rival, and anti-colonial stirrings surfaced in places like India and Ireland. In the early 20th century, the Anglo-American relationship evolved from overt hostility to grudging cooperation, particularly during World War I. Though the United States initially remained neutral, its eventual intervention in 1917 added fresh manpower and resources to the Allied cause. This shift subtly exposed Britain's reliance on American might. After the war, Britain grappled with debts and economic strains, forcing it to lean further on American finance. The 1920s saw a surge in American economic dominance. Wall Street replaced London's financial center in global significance. World War II accelerated this trend. Britain, under relentless pressure from Nazi Germany, depended on American Lend-Lease aid for survival. By war's end, the U.S. emerged as the unquestioned economic powerhouse, forging global systems like Bretton Woods that solidified the dollar's role as a primary reserve currency. The Suez Crisis of 1956 starkly revealed Britain's reduced clout. When U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower refused to support the Franco-British invasion of Egypt, Britain was forced to withdraw, confirming the end of its reign as the world's paramount imperial power. In essence, America had broken the British Empire through a series of defining steps: the Revolutionary Break, the reaffirmation of independence in 1812, industrial and economic ascendancy, and ultimately overshadowing Britain's global influence during and after World War II. By the mid-20th century, the baton of world leadership had passed. America now took the role once held by Britain, reshaping world affairs in its own image. The lion's roar, once so dominant, had given way to a new voice across the Atlantic. Thank you for joining us for Shattering the Lion's Roar: How America Undermined the British Empire. We've traced this incredible journey from the rebellious spirit of 13 colonies to the global ascendancy of the United States, a saga that spanned centuries and shaped the world we inhabit today. If you found this exploration of revolutions, wars, and power shifts enlightening, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. This story is more than just battles and treaties. It's about the transformative force of ideas, economics, and changing global alliances. The American experiment not only shattered Britain's hold over its colonies, but also demonstrated how a nation grounded in new democratic principles could outpace a centuries-old imperial system. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and keep engaging with the history that forged our present.